They taught you that America was built on liberty, on divine guidance, on a sacred covenant between man and God. They told you its founders were noble men guided by righteousness and Christian values. But beneath the marble monuments and patriotic myths lies a secret buried so deeply that speaking it aloud was once punishable by death. The truth is that America was not only founded by men, it was founded by a bloodline, a lineage that traces back through the ages, from the ancient priesthoods of Babylon, through the mystery schools of Egypt, through Rome, and eventually into the hidden chambers of Masonic lodges that would shape the birth of the United States. This bloodline carries more than history. It carries allegiance, not to the God of Scripture, but to the Lightbringer, the one called Lucifer. The signs are everywhere, hiding in plain sight. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, the obelisk in Washington, the pentagram woven into the city's streets. These are not Christian symbols. They are relics of the old religion, one kept alive by those whose power spans continents and centuries. Some say the bloodline is metaphorical. Others know it to be literal, preserved through intermarriage, secret rites, and carefully guarded genealogies. Presidents, judges, banking elites. Many are connected by ancestry and oath to this hidden priesthood. They do not serve the public. They serve a higher power, one that promised them influence, knowledge, and control in exchange for absolute silence. This is not conspiracy. It is continuity. A lineage that bends nations to its will while masking itself behind flags, crosses, and constitutions. America is not just a nation. It is the final instrument of a Luciferian agenda that began long before 1776, and the blood that runs through its veins does not belong to freedom. It belongs to something far older, far darker, and it still rules today. We grow up pledging allegiance to a flag we're told stands for liberty and justice. In classrooms, we recite stories of brave revolutionaries who fought for freedom, guided by divine inspiration and a sacred duty to humanity. America, we are told, is a Christian nation built upon the values of righteousness, humility, and godly leadership. The founding fathers are framed as saints of democracy, men of prayer who carved a beacon of hope from the wilderness of tyranny. But this is the lie. This is the illusion meticulously crafted to mask the truth of what America has always been. A vessel, not for divine freedom, but for a far more calculated power. The founding fathers were not uniform in faith. Many were deists, masons, and initiates into secret orders whose true loyalty lay not with Jesus Christ, but with ancient symbols of illumination and gnosis. While schoolbooks depict the Constitution as a gift from heaven, the reality is that many of the men behind its creation were adherents to esoteric philosophies that rejected the moral authority of the Church and embraced a doctrine of personal divinity through hidden knowledge. The narrative that America is a Christian country collapses under scrutiny. "In God we trust" wasn't added to currency until the 1950s. The phrase "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance is even newer. These were retroactive insertions, propaganda tools designed to reinforce the illusion of piety in a system that was never built on spiritual obedience, but on ideological autonomy and occult architecture. The deeper one digs into America's origins, the more disturbing the evidence becomes. George Washington wasn't just a general and president. He was a master mason who laid the Capitol's cornerstone in a ritual ceremony rooted in ancient Egyptian and Babylonian rites. Benjamin Franklin was a known Rosicrucian and member of secret orders that practiced symbolic alchemy and studied forbidden texts. Thomas Jefferson owned a copy of the Quran, rewrote the Bible to remove all mentions of miracles, and held a deeply skeptical view of Christian doctrine. These were not spiritual shepherds. They were ideological architects, laying the groundwork for a nation designed to be the public face of a private empire. The architecture of Washington, D.C. was not developed randomly. The city was planned with precise alignment to celestial events, geometric symbolism, and numerological significance. The streets form pentagrams, crosses, and compass and square layouts, mirroring the internal logic of Masonic temples. The Washington Monument is not just a tower. It's an obelisk, a phallic symbol of solar worship directly inspired by the cults of Osiris. The U.S. Capitol building itself is modeled after Roman temples, complete with domes and apotheosis murals that depict human figures ascending into godhood. These aren't accidents, they're declarations. The very blueprint of America's capital is a spell, a sigil cast in stone and law. Even the most revered symbols of American pride carry traces of this deception. The bald eagle, often touted as a symbol of strength and freedom, holds in its talons 13 arrows and an olive branch with 13 leaves, both symbols that echo Masonic numerology, where 13 signifies death, rebirth, and transformation. The Great Seal features the all-seeing eye above an unfinished pyramid, a symbol of Luciferian ascent, where man becomes God through knowledge and rebellion. And inscribed beneath it, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages. Not a Christian phrase, not a biblical quote, a manifesto for those who seek dominion through secret light. Publicly, America quotes the Bible. Privately, it venerates Prometheus, the one who stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. The Lightbringer, the rebel, Lucifer. This philosophy of self-deification lies at the heart of the American mythos. It masquerades as freedom, but it is a freedom from divine law, a declaration that man is no longer beholden to heaven, that he is his own creator, judge, and redeemer. This is the cornerstone upon which the Republic was truly built. Not the Ten Commandments, but the doctrine of internal illumination, where the path to godhood lies not in submission, but in rebellion. And while countless citizens believe they are living in a godly nation, the truth is that they are walking through a nation consecrated to another god entirely, one who does not seek worship through love, but through secrecy, symbols, and silence. Behind the polished veneer of American history lies a vast archive of erased knowledge, forbidden rituals, and genealogies so carefully obscured that only fragments remain in whispers, symbols, and censored texts. The bloodline that threads through ancient empires, temples, and thrones did not vanish with the collapse of Babylon or the burning of Rome. It adapted, disguised itself, and migrated across continents, always maintaining its central doctrine: control through secrecy, power through esoteric wisdom, and ascension through Luciferian illumination. These families, descendants of high priests, magi, and sun kings, carried within them both literal blood and ideological legacy, a sacred charge to uphold the dominion of the Lightbringer across generations. When the old world began to fracture under the weight of revolution, these elites sought a new sanctuary, one untouched, unshaped, and ripe for spiritual re-engineering. They did not merely come to America as immigrants or pioneers. They came as architects, determined to lay the foundation of a nation that would serve not Christ, but the great architect of the universe, whose light was not divine grace, but hidden knowledge, the gnosis stolen from heaven and offered to man as forbidden fruit. They embedded themselves into the very root system of American society, not through public religion, but through secret fraternities, esoteric councils, and selective blood marriages. The Freemasons were only the outer garment, a protective shell cloaking deeper, older orders whose names are now forgotten, but whose symbols still remain. Beneath the Masonic lodges were the Rosicrucians, the illuminated ones, and hidden branches of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Their rites invoked the old gods, not as mythic figures, but as real spiritual forces, archetypes of rebellion, knowledge, and domination. These rites were conducted in silence, sealed by oaths, and encoded in architecture, literature, and law. It was never about belief, it was about continuity. Continuity of rule, of will, and of spiritual allegiance. While the average citizen bowed their heads in prayer to a deity of love and forgiveness, the hidden elite maintained devotion to a god of power, fire, and rebellion. Lucifer, in their creed, was not the adversary, but the liberator, the one who defied tyranny to awaken man. The physical documents that revealed this transmission of power were systematically erased, hidden in private archives, or quietly declassified under obscure labels. Thousands of esoteric manuscripts were removed from university collections under the guise of irrelevance. In the early 20th century, entire libraries of forbidden works were confiscated by government bodies or lost in fires. Secret correspondence between early American leaders discussing mystical symbology and ritual planning disappeared from official records, replaced by sanitized biographies that made no mention of their esoteric affiliations. Even the foundational myths of the nation, like the story of the Liberty Bell or the Declaration of Independence, were filtered through layers of revisionism, omitting their deeper symbolic purpose. The Liberty Bell itself, for instance, was not merely a call for independence, but a sonic talisman intended to resonate with specific numerical harmonics associated with Masonic ritual. These details were stripped from history books, reduced to patriotic folklore to keep the masses docile and uninformed. Genealogical records tell a more disturbing story. Several American presidents, senators, and Supreme Court justices share common ancestry with European nobility, particularly those families tied to the Merovingian, Carolingian, and Plantagenet bloodlines, dynasties long associated with divine right, rule, and alleged descent from supernatural beings. These connections are not accidental. They are the careful result of generational interbreeding among elites who believe that certain traits, both spiritual and genetic, must be preserved at all costs. And though modern historians dismiss these patterns as coincidence or statistical anomalies, the recurring presence of these lineages at the apex of political power reveals the quiet hand of a legacy determined to survive. Even religious movements in America were not safe from infiltration. In the 19th century, dozens of fringe sects arose, many claiming direct revelations from angels or spirits. But what the public didn't see were the esoteric underpinnings of these movements. Rituals borrowed from Kabbalah, numerology, and ancient Gnostic texts. Behind the sermons and revival tents were initiates, planted or groomed, spreading variations of the same Luciferian doctrine under different names. The goal was never open worship. It was ideological saturation, to dissolve orthodox belief and replace it with a system where man is God, knowledge is salvation, and rebellion is virtue. This was the true war of the founding centuries, not between colonies and empires, but between rival visions of spiritual dominion. One cloaked itself in scripture. The other cloaked itself in light. One declared salvation through faith. The other offered power through knowing. And over time, the latter won, not by force, but by patience. It rewrote the history. It built the monuments. It trained the scholars. It created a national memory devoid of its own origins. America became not a refuge from tyranny, but a perfected vessel for a subtler, older one. More sophisticated, more complete, more hidden. What remains today are only fragments of this erased history. Symbols etched in stone, documents buried in archives, and stories whispered between those who remember. But piece by piece, the truth is surfacing. The names may be forgotten, but the agenda is not. The bloodline continues, and its silence is its greatest weapon. They tried to erase it, but what is hidden is not lost forever. It waits. And it watches. The legacy of the Luciferian bloodline was never meant to be openly acknowledged. It was not preserved through public scripture or national holidays, but encoded into the very architecture, symbology, and rituals of American power. These symbols function not only as passive decorations, but as active sigils, tools of spiritual manipulation, silent declarations of allegiance, and territorial markers of dominion. The United States was never meant to be a Christian sanctuary. It was constructed as a temple, an open-air ritual site where the masses unknowingly walk through geometries of ancient invocation and carry currency marked by emblems of occult governance. To the untrained eye, these symbols appear harmless or even patriotic. But to those who know their origin, they are unmistakable warnings. Warnings that the world we live in is not what it seems, and that its rulers serve a master far older and more cunning than any president or pope. One of the most ubiquitous and misunderstood symbols is the Eye of Providence, found atop the pyramid on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States and printed on every $1 bill. It is often explained away as a symbol of divine oversight or enlightenment, but its true origins lie in ancient Egyptian theology, where the eye represented the all-seeing gaze of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and later, in esoteric traditions, became synonymous with the eye of Lucifer, the light-bringer who sees all from his throne of hidden illumination. In Masonic tradition, the eye represents the omniscience of the great architect, a god who is not defined by morality but by mastery. Its placement above an unfinished pyramid is deliberate. The pyramid represents the hierarchical structure of spiritual initiation, incomplete until the capstone, symbolizing full illumination and godhood, is placed. That capstone is not physical but ideological. It represents the Luciferian doctrine that remains hidden from the masses at the base, known only to those at the top. The Latin phrase beneath the seal, Novus Ordo Seclorum, translates to New Order of the Ages, a direct reference to a coming era of enlightened rule, stripped of old moralities, and ruled by those who possess the forbidden light. The streets of Washington, D.C. were not laid out by chance. They form geometric patterns that replicate ancient sacred geometry, designed according to Masonic and esoteric principles. L'Enfant's original city plan was altered under the influence of known Freemasons to include an inverted pentagram pointing toward the White House, intersecting with the compass and square, the primary symbols of Masonry. These shapes, when viewed from above, form ritual diagrams, not dissimilar to those used in ceremonial magic to summon and bind spiritual forces. The Capitol building is positioned to face the rising sun during the summer solstice, a practice rooted in solar worship. Its dome replicates the domes of Roman temples dedicated to Jupiter and Mars. At the center of that dome is the Apotheosis of Washington, a fresco depicting the first president ascending into godhood, surrounded by Roman deities. This is not mere patriotism. It is the iconography of deification. Washington is not honored as a servant of God, but as a man who became one, a message in perfect alignment with Luciferian ideology. Even the Washington Monument, often dismissed as a tribute to national pride, is in truth an obelisk, a symbol of the phallus of Osiris, erected in Egyptian temples to harness solar energy and project divine authority. Its proportions are carefully calculated, standing at 555 feet, a number charged with esoteric significance. Obelisks were never just architectural features. They were magical tools designed to open energetic channels between earth and sky, often in alignment with stars sacred to the priesthoods of antiquity. The alignment of the monument with the Capitol and the White House forms a trinity of power, a terrestrial mirror of spiritual hierarchy. These placements are not accidents. They are intentions cast in stone. Within the Supreme Court building, gods of ancient law preside silently from the cornices: Hammurabi, Confucius, Moses, but also pagan figures like Themis and Solon, whose presence reflects not Christian law, but the continuity of rule through esoteric justice. The very concept of blind justice with scales and sword originates from the goddess Ma'at, whose balance determined the fate of souls in the Egyptian underworld. The Statue of Liberty, holding a torch high above her head, is modeled not on Christian saints, but on the Roman goddess Libertas and the Greek Hecate, goddesses of crossroads, liminal spaces, and hidden paths. The torch is not just a symbol of welcome. It is the Promethean flame, the stolen fire of the gods, the eternal light of rebellion that Lucifer brought to man. In the hands of this statue, it is not liberty that is offered, but initiation. These symbols are not confined to monuments. They appear on currency, in corporate logos, and in government insignia. The 13 steps of the pyramid, the eagle holding 13 arrows and olive leaves, the pentagram within the Medal of Honor, all refer back to sacred numerology, where 13 represents transformation, death, and rebirth. In Kabbalistic and Hermetic systems, numbers are not neutral. They are frequencies, codes, triggers, and by embedding them into the fabric of national identity, the architects of this empire ensured that every transaction, every oath, every ritual bore the imprint of the old gods. Even time has not escaped this occult structure. The Gregorian calendar, the numbering of the U.S. founding year as 1776, coinciding not only with independence, but with the birth of the Bavarian Illuminati, is more than historical parallel. It is a marker, a declaration that the age of concealed enlightenment had begun. That year is imprinted in Roman numerals at the base of the Great Seal. MDCCLX66, an invocation, a numerical spell, a cornerstone. These clues are everywhere, yet the masses remain blind. They walk through temples and call them office buildings. They salute gods they do not recognize and swear oaths on books they have never read. The success of the Luciferian bloodline lies not in brute force, but in symbolic saturation. It has convinced a nation to celebrate its own bondage as freedom, to mistake rebellion for patriotism, and to believe that light must always mean truth. But the light of Lucifer is a different kind of illumination, one that burns, blinds, and consumes. And America, from its foundation to its currency, from its monuments to its laws, has been bathed in that light since the very beginning. The symbols that permeate American power structures are not idle remnants of ancient cultures. They are the signature of a quiet dominion. A dominion sustained not by the consent of the governed, but by the silence of the deceived. While the public is conditioned to believe in representation, democratic choice, and constitutional justice, the truth is that these systems function as a facade, an elaborate theater masking the enduring influence of an elite class that has no allegiance to the people, but only to its own bloodlines and doctrines. The lie that America is governed by the will of its citizens is a tool designed to prevent rebellion, to pacify inquiry, and to cloak a deeper reality. That control does not flow from ballots, but from blood. That power is not granted, but inherited, safeguarded, and ritualistically transferred. The beneficiaries of this deception are not those who rise by merit, nor those who labor for the good of society. They are the inheritors of oaths sworn in darkness. Families whose names may never appear in the headlines, yet whose influence can collapse markets, start wars, and install leaders. These families exist above partisan politics. They finance both sides of every election. They own the media that sculpts public perception. They shape education to exclude their own origins. Their children do not attend the same schools. Their wealth is not subject to the same risks. And their agendas do not align with national interest. Their loyalty lies only with continuity. Continuity of power, secrecy, and alignment with the Luciferian archetype of dominion through light withheld. Presidents come and go, but the advisors remain. Cabinets shuffle, but the financiers persist. The visible face of government is little more than a rotating mask worn by an invisible priesthood of power. And behind them stands a network of think tanks, policy groups, international councils, and foundations, each seemingly disconnected, but in truth, operating as instruments of the same long-range plan. This plan is not economic. It is spiritual. It is the systematic reprogramming of mankind to accept inversion as progress and subjugation as freedom. At the core of this ideology is the belief that man should not be guided by divine command, but by self-generated will. That morality is an illusion, and that the strong, those who have seized the fire, are rightful rulers of the weak. This belief system has flourished in secret, reinforced through decades of media, entertainment, and law. Films that glorify rebellion and chaos, music that celebrates inversion of values, legal systems that normalize what was once unthinkable. All of it flows downstream from a higher altar. Those who benefit from the lie know that control is more effective when the subject believes himself free. They have mastered the art of psychological manipulation, constructing a social order in which rebellion is permitted only within the boundaries they define, where outrage is channeled into movements they sponsor, and where dissent is reduced to ritualistic outrage that never touches the core of power. Economic systems have been engineered to reinforce dependency. Inflation, debt, scarcity. These are not accidents, but instruments of control. The Federal Reserve, a privately owned institution cloaked in federal identity, has devalued currency and siphoned generational wealth for over a century. Its creators were not elected officials, but representatives of banking dynasties whose wealth predates the nation itself. These dynasties benefit from every crisis. Every recession transfers more land, more resources, more influence upward. Every war is financed from both ends. Soldiers die, borders shift, but the families remain untouched, enriched, and further insulated. Their investments are protected, their agendas advanced, and the public, mourning and divided, is kept from ever recognizing the hand behind the chaos. Religion, too, has been reshaped to serve their ends. The institutional church has been hollowed out, transformed from a bastion of moral clarity into a corporate entity obsessed with appeasement and ambiguity. Sermons avoid uncomfortable truths. Doctrine is diluted. What was once sacred is now social. The bloodline benefits from this spiritual erosion, because it removes the last internal compass from the collective psyche. When people no longer believe in absolute truth, they become easier to guide, to confuse, and to conquer. The Luciferian ideal thrives in relativism, in the belief that right and wrong are subjective, in the seductive whisper that knowledge is enough, that power is virtue, and that submission to higher moral law is weakness. Education is another tool. History textbooks have been scrubbed clean of any reference to the esoteric forces that shaped the founding of the United States. Students are taught to venerate men whose true affiliations remain hidden. The Masonic rites of Washington, the Rosicrucian ties of Franklin, the Illuminist sympathies of Jefferson, all omitted. Instead, the curriculum promotes a linear progression of enlightenment, revolution, and democracy, while carefully avoiding any mention of the occult infrastructure that supported it. Universities, once places of inquiry, now function as institutions of indoctrination. Tenure is awarded not for truth-telling, but for compliance. Dissent is punished. Original thought is buried beneath administrative codes and ideological policing. And through it all, the bloodline remains above scrutiny. Technology has become their most powerful ally. Surveillance once required effort. Now it is volunteered. Devices track every movement, record every word, and monitor every preference. Social media platforms, owned or influenced by elite capital, algorithmically sculpt thought, prioritize narratives, and suppress revelation. Censorship is no longer imposed by governments, but by invisible hands whose authority cannot be challenged because it is not acknowledged. This is the final expression of control. When the prison requires no guards, and the prisoner defends his own chains. Those who benefit from the lie have engineered a society where the truth is not just hidden, it is ridiculed. Where exposure is not just punished, it is preemptively discredited. Whistleblowers are labeled madmen, critics are smeared, and the bloodline, once again, remains untouched. The greatest beneficiaries of the American illusion are not those who hold office, but those who choose who gets to hold it. Not those who write the laws, but those who decide which laws will be enforced. Not those who build the temples, but those who lay the cornerstones. They have no party, no nation, no God, but the one who gave them light. And through that light, they have built an empire of silence, spectacle, and control. An empire where the masses believe they are free, while every choice, every belief, every ritual feeds the same ancient flame. Once the veil is lifted, the pattern becomes undeniable. The architecture, the symbols, the rituals, the bloodlines, none of it is accidental. It all leads to one conclusion so deeply unsettling that most refuse to face it. The United States of America was never a neutral experiment in liberty. It was a meticulously designed project by those who serve a different master. A master not of heaven, but of light, twisted into domination. The truth that changes everything is that the Luciferian bloodline did not merely infiltrate the American system. It birthed it. America is not a fallen empire. It is the culmination of a spiritual agenda that began long before its founding, one that seeks not only to control territory or economics, but to redefine human destiny itself. The symbols are declarations of ownership. The structures are temples of transformation. The doctrines are not ideological. They are occult. The idea that Lucifer is merely a symbol of rebellion or an abstract representation of knowledge is itself a deception. To the initiates of this bloodline, he is real. Not as the grotesque figure of horns and fire, but as the archetype of illumination, of divine autonomy, of power unrestrained by moral law. In their view, Lucifer is not evil. He is the true giver of freedom, the one who defied tyranny and offered man the keys to his own evolution. And so, to them, the suppression of this knowledge by traditional religion was the greatest injustice. Their mission, passed down through generations, has been to liberate humanity from that bondage. Not to save souls, but to transform them into gods. The United States, with its unique blend of Enlightenment philosophy, Masonic structure, and rapid technological ascent, was designed as the laboratory for that transformation. A nation that would incubate a new human, one detached from tradition, faith, and submission to divine authority. One who would seek power through self-realization, knowledge, and rebellion. One who would, knowingly or not, participate in the Luciferian ascent. This is the truth that changes everything. The most powerful institutions in the modern world are not simply corrupted. They were born corrupted. The highest offices in government, finance, education, media, and even religion were structured as vessels for this spiritual operation. The bloodline behind them is not merely a metaphor for elites. It is a literal transmission of ideology, authority, and ritual through biological lineage. These families have preserved their essence through centuries, not just through wealth, but through spiritual loyalty. Loyalty to the one who offered them light, not for illumination, but for control. They believe it is their destiny to rule, not because of divine appointment, but because they have taken the fire. And they believe those who live in darkness, those who cling to faith, to morality, to God, are slaves to be guided or eliminated. Every pillar of American life reflects this inversion. Justice is no longer about truth. It is about manipulation of perception. Education is no longer about enlightenment. It is about suppression of memory. Media is not a mirror. It is a weapon. Religion, once the safeguard of the soul, has been turned into a hollow shell, repurposed to preach tolerance of lies and silence in the face of spiritual war. All of it flows from a single source: the belief that man can become God without God. This is the essence of Luciferianism. Not the theatrical rituals of pop culture Satanism, but the subtle, systemic reprogramming of humanity to reject divine order in favor of personal sovereignty. A sovereignty offered at the cost of obedience, humility, and truth. The truth also reveals the method. Luciferianism does not conquer by armies. It conquers by consent. It convinces the population to accept its principles by repackaging them as progress. Freedom becomes freedom from moral law. Knowledge becomes knowledge without conscience. Choice becomes worship of self above all else. Slowly, line by line, law by law, image by image, the nation is transformed into a mirror of the ideology that shaped it. The people, thinking themselves awake, walk willingly into spiritual enslavement, mistaking light for truth and rebellion for wisdom. The rituals that mark American life, pledges, elections, entertainments, holidays, become substitutes for real initiation, binding the soul to a false narrative while the true rulers operate beyond reach, behind symbols the public cannot decipher. This truth is not merely academic, it is existential. It demands a reckoning. Because once you understand that the world you were taught to trust was built upon a lie, you can never look at it the same way again. The Luciferian bloodline has already succeeded in shaping reality to its will. It has already written itself into history not as villain, but as visionary. And unless one is willing to unlearn everything, to see beyond the ritual pageantry of patriotism and progress, one will remain its servant. The bloodline does not fear rebellion. It anticipates it. It builds systems to absorb it. What it fears is awakening, true awakening. Not to political corruption or social injustice, but to the spiritual battle waged in secret across centuries. The truth that changes everything is not simply that evil exists. It is that evil has worn the mask of light, of reason, of justice, and of freedom for so long that most no longer recognize it. Lucifer's greatest victory was not rebellion, it was branding his rebellion as enlightenment. And in doing so, he has led entire nations to confuse godhood with pride, wisdom with arrogance, and light with domination. America is not a failed dream. It is the perfected vehicle for this deception. A temple dressed as a republic, a ritual cloaked as governance, a nation built not to protect the soul, but to claim it. And unless this truth is faced and spoken and resisted, the bloodline will complete its final act. The unification of power, knowledge, and belief into a new order where no god is worshipped, but the one who fell to offer man the illusion of freedom. Those who have come close to revealing the truth have often met a predictable fate: silencing, discreditation, erasure. This suppression is not coincidental, nor is it reactionary. It is systematic. For centuries, the Luciferian bloodline and its allied networks have perfected the art of control through invisibility, not by eliminating every threat with violence, but by making truth unspeakable, absurd, or irrelevant. Writers who have dared to document the occult foundations of American power are dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Historians who trace the esoteric symbolism embedded in national monuments are marginalized and stripped of academic credibility. Clergy who expose the Luciferian inversion in modern religion are excommunicated or ridiculed. Silence is not simply enforced. It is manufactured, nurtured, embedded into the psyche of the population, until the very suggestion of hidden power becomes laughable. The bloodline has learned that truth does not need to be destroyed. It merely needs to be surrounded by noise, disinformation, and constant distraction. This suppression operates across multiple layers. On the cultural level, media systems flood public consciousness with meaningless narratives, endless cycles of entertainment, scandal, and emotional manipulation. The goal is saturation. So much content, so much stimulus, that the average mind is incapable of holding a single unfiltered thought. Attention is fragmented. Memory is reduced to headlines, and the ability to connect patterns is systematically disabled. Even when someone stumbles upon a truth, it is quickly drowned in the flood. Algorithmic suppression ensures that certain content never reaches the masses. Videos disappear, search results are buried, and social media accounts vanish overnight, all without explanation. The platforms that promise connection and openness are the very tools through which visibility is controlled. Those who dare to speak out against the system are not martyred. They are muted, made invisible, dismissed by design. On the political level, the suppression is even more insidious. Whistleblowers are targeted with legal ruin, personal collapse, or public disgrace. Investigations into hidden networks of influence are delayed, redacted, or classified under the guise of national security. Even elected officials who attempt to pierce the veil find themselves obstructed by a labyrinth of unelected authorities, intelligence agencies, advisory councils, financial lobbies that operate with total autonomy. These entities do not serve the public, they serve the continuity of power. The bloodline does not fear elections, it does not fear parties. It fears exposure, and so it ensures that no meaningful revelation ever reaches the public in unfiltered form. The result is a world where truth is no longer debated. It is simply erased before it can take root. But even in this engineered silence, cracks are beginning to show. Symbols once ignored are now questioned. Rituals once dismissed as tradition are now scrutinized. More people than ever before are asking who built the world they live in and why it feels increasingly artificial, unstable, and hollow. The bloodline's control is vast, but it is not infallible. Its greatest vulnerability is its dependence on secrecy. For centuries, it has operated in the shadows, but shadows vanish when exposed to the right kind of light. Not the false light of Luciferian pride, but the light of discernment, humility, and unflinching clarity. What comes next is a battle not for land or laws, but for perception itself. Those who awaken must face a world built to deny their very awareness. They will be mocked, isolated, and tempted to return to ignorance. But the cost of ignorance is servitude. The cost of silence is complicity. The only path forward is resistance, not in the form of violence, but in the unwavering commitment to truth. To speak what cannot be spoken, to question what cannot be questioned, to endure the exile that comes from seeing the world as it truly is. The awakening begins not with revolution, but with remembrance. Remembering that freedom is not granted by governments, it is not written in constitutions or legislated by courts. Freedom is spiritual. It is the alignment of one's soul with truth, no matter how forbidden, no matter how costly. Those who serve the bloodline know this. That is why they have worked so hard to bury the past, to corrupt memory, to distort history. Because the moment a critical mass of people remember what was erased, the illusion collapses. Their power was never in numbers. It was in silence. Their strength was never in visibility. It was in the ignorance of the masses. But ignorance is not eternal. As more awaken, the rituals lose their potency. The symbols lose their secrecy. The bloodline, once protected by centuries of darkness, finds itself exposed to a force it cannot control. Awareness. True awareness spreads quietly, subversively. It does not need institutions. It does not need permission. It begins with the individual. It begins with a choice, to see, to know, and to no longer participate in the lie. What comes next will not be easy. The system will tighten. The suppression will escalate. Truth will become more dangerous. But danger is not defeat. It is confirmation. Confirmation that the path forward is real, and that the cost of truth is a price worth paying. The Luciferian bloodline has ruled through deception, but deception only works on those who choose comfort over courage. This moment, this awakening, is the beginning of their undoing. Because once seen, the truth cannot be unseen. Once known, it cannot be unknown. And once spoken, it echoes beyond the reach of suppression. It multiplies. It resonates. It becomes a new kind of light. Not the light of pride, but of revelation. Not the light that enslaves, but the light that frees. And that is what comes next.